On this week's NFV SDN Reality Check, we talk with It's On about virtualizing carrier support platforms.
Nexius, accelerating network and business transformation.
Telecom Careers, the #1 global telecom and wireless job board, telecomcareers.com.
Hello, welcome. Thanks for joining us on this week's NFV SDN Reality Check. I'm your host, Dan Meyer, Editor-in-Chief here at RCR Wireless News. This week, we are joined by Robert Oberhofer, who's the VP of Product Marketing at It's On, to talk a bit about what the company's doing in the terms of virtualization and how it works with its customer partners. So, hey, Robert, thanks for joining us today. We appreciate it.
Hey, Dan, how are you doing? Nice to meet you.
Great. Well, maybe if you can give us a little overview of the company, maybe for those who don't know much about It's On. I know you guys have been in the space for a while. I know you guys had some deals recently with Sprint and Virgin Mobile. So maybe give us a little overview of the company and kind of how you're working with Sprint and Virgin Mobile.
Yeah. So It's On is a company which has been founded in 2008. It's based in Silicon Valley, and it's a company which is focused on trying to change the way that subscribers engage with carriers and carriers engage with subscribers. So what it comes down to is we try to offer a different way how services are configured and created on the carrier side and on the consumer side of how they're actually purchased and consumed. And there's a terminology that's called the digital service provider and digital experience. And really, what It's On provides is a great advanced digital experience for carrier services. So the way that you purchase voice, text, and data, the way that billing works, the way that you are able to go beyond voice, text, and data as a carrier, and changing as well the relationship between the subscriber and the carrier to a just to over a better experience.
Got it.
So, and as such, and based in Silicon Valley, we're sort of a company which combines an internet mindset with a telco mindset as well. And I think that's kind of what makes It's On unique.
Yeah, that's a good point there. Obviously, there are kind of two different worlds, really. I mean, I know it's kind of coming together more and more, but you're right. There is the internet mindset of kind of the fail fast, roll things out quickly, take chances, where the telecom mindset is definitely very conservative. I think we all know that too. So it's good to kind of have some experience in both of those and be able to work, kind of bridge that gap, I'm sure is a big part of what you guys are doing, bringing to the market.
Correct. Yeah. And so in that sense of how do you create this experience as a carrier, we're trying to, because you mentioned agility, we're trying to make it in a way that it's actually very fast for carriers to think about how can they adapt their services. And that's important because now competition is changing. It's different type of competitors that carriers are facing. Consumers are gravitating to all these new and exciting services, and how do they stay still relevant as a carrier? And so being able to adapt quickly, change services, make them exciting becomes actually business critical. And you recognize that, and that's actually one of the key components that our service that we provide allows carriers to do, to adapt it, to roll out a service, to configure it, to test it with a subset of subscribers, get the feedback, quickly process that feedback, change the service, roll it out to a bigger group. So A/B comparison. So there are a lot of these things that when you talk to internet players, that sense of agility we're bringing now to the telco world.
Got it. And I know you guys have been working a little bit with Sprint and Virgin. I think it was a deal announced last year, I think, with both companies to kind of power some other platforms there. Can you talk a bit about what you guys are doing with Sprint and with Virgin Mobile in terms of allowing them to kind of tap into what you guys are offering in the market?
Sure. So with Sprint and Virgin, we're actually powering some of the services, especially Virgin. Yeah. They rolled out a service called Virgin Data and Write, which rolled out actually earlier this year, mid-January. And that is a service that is actually available you can purchase it via Walmart. You can go into Walmart store. You can actually get a Virgin device off the pack. You can unwrap the device. You can start to, as an end user, configure the service completely on the device and actually have, that kind of experience here. You can completely configure it out of box without necessarily having to talk to somebody in the store or get the help. You can put in your credit card. You can select your voice, text, and data plan, add-ons that you choose, and you basically can get going within 5 minutes. So that's actually what we're doing with Virgin. So rolled out mid-January. It's actually progressing very, very well. And then on the Sprint side, they're using as well advanced capability that we have with the device software, because the on-device software is a key part of the system and the solution that we provide, to have advanced on-device policy to help manage the way that the device is attached to the network and actually optimization there. So we have both Virgin and Sprint services that actually provide value to them.
Got it. That makes sense. Okay, sounds good. Well, obviously on the show we talk a lot about virtualization and SDN and NFV and all those different great new acronyms in the world. So maybe, I guess, can you touch a little bit on, I guess, how you guys bring or look at virtualization and how it kind of, I guess, empowers your network, empowers your platform? What do you guys look for virtualization to do, and how is it helping you guys, I guess, kind of virtualize these platforms for your carrier customers?
Right. So here it's where perhaps its own is a little bit different to most vendors in the telco space. And I think the first one to know is that we're a SaaS platform.
Yep.
So the whole platform is operated by its own as well. And as part of that, we're using virtualization as a way of operating our platform. And for the same reasons that carriers are looking at SDN and NFV, and that internet players are looking at as well, because it does give you flexibility. It does allow the way that you lay out your service and all the different components. It allows you to do that in a more flexible way, and we take full advantage of that. Having said that, our focus was really around solving a business level problem. And so when you look at NFV or SDN, it kind of seems to be the other way around, that you're looking first at how do you deploy things in a flexible way. And I think our first priority is how can we solve a business problem in a flexible way. And if you want to roll out, as I said, you want to have business agility, you want to roll out services very quickly, you want to do A/B comparison, what is the software that you need to do that? Where does policy have to sit? How do all the different components have to communicate to each other? Therefore, what are these services and APIs that you have to build to do that? And then perhaps do you have how you deploy that particular software, and that's where virtualization perhaps comes in. So we think of it more business problem and end user experience first, and what does it mean, and what do you have to implement, what do you have to integrate, and then virtualization is just the way that you deploy things.
Sure. Well, that's a great way to look at it, because obviously, I mean, at the end of the day, the business model of virtualization is really what's going to make or break it. I mean, obviously, the technology part of it will get worked out. There's smart people out there working on these types of platforms. Right. It's just a matter of, at the end of the day, if it makes sense financially. And for you guys to kind of tackle it, that part first, seems probably like maybe a smarter way to go, because again, that is, at the end of the day, the biggest challenge. So to tackle that part of it, a good way to do it, it seems like.
It is. I mean, and having the flexibility with virtualization does solve a problem, though it is really around the flexibility of how can you abstract from the underlying hardware? How do you kind of disconnect from that software and hardware being kind of sold as one entity? So that's actually very valuable. For us, it's really though it's kind of just how you deploy it. And I think there's so many other layers that really we believe there's a lot of value that and changes that have to be made. And so just thinking of virtualization per se doesn't actually necessarily help with the top level business problem.
Sure. Well, I mean, I was going to ask you a little bit about like maybe some challenges you saw in terms of the technology aspect of it, but maybe a better question for you guys is any sort of challenges you see in terms of the business model for this, because obviously that is a tricky part of this, and I know operators are really working through that part, trying to make sure that this makes sense financially. As you guys look at virtualization from a business model perspective, were there challenges? Are there still challenges in making sure that as you bring this platform to operators, that they actually can see, hey, this does make sense financially to go this way? Or is that still kind of a bit of is there still some work that needs to be done in terms of getting the business model part of it right?
So on the business model side, again, because it's a SaaS offering,
sure.
It changes because of the SaaS way of approaching the carriers with our service proposition. Changes that from a business perspective and pretty dramatically, because now you have not just the way it's deployed, the way it's operated, and then the way that actually that cost is bundled into the SaaS pricing. That's kind of the big change that we have. So when we think of our value proposition to the carrier, we don't think of what the virtualization component is per se, but what's the overall value proposition that we provide, and what's the overall cost that it is for the carrier. It's actually, a SaaS model is much easier to calculate for a carrier, because all the operating costs are actually integrated into that model. So it simplifies things. It makes it very, very easy to understand. It makes it very predictable as well. Right? And it's aligned as well with the way that, with the carrier's model as well, because you have a defined cost, and the cost grows with the success of the service. And it's not that carriers have to have a lot of upfront cost into something where they don't know whether this particular vendor's software is actually really going to help me on the business level or not. So SaaS model actually helps a lot.
That makes sense. Okay, that makes sense. And also from a vendor perspective, it's a nice model as well, because again, it's a very agile model you can offer to the operators too. So it makes it a pretty, I'm guessing, easier sell, or an easier, kind of show it off to the operators too. So it's easy for operators, easy for you guys. Seems to be a good model to go with.
It is different though. So it requires a different kind of mindset and different attitude. But that comes as well because we're trying to enable operators to think and operate in an internet way. And so a different mindset comes into play, not just because of it's a SaaS model, it's just the way that, or the kind of skill set you have to bring to actually think like an internet player, right? Yeah. Agility is not just a software solutions as well. How do you operate it? How do you have even the discipline of taking or making a decision very quickly of how to adopt the service? How do you market it as well? How do you get the feedback? How do you really understand your customer better? How do you engage in a different way? So there's a lot of things that come into play.
Makes sense. Okay. Well, I know. Now, obviously, now you work with Sprint, like you mentioned a little bit earlier. You're doing a lot with them on helping them, I guess, on the policy side of things. Obviously, how what a customer can do on the network once it attaches to the network, what their policy and charging systems are for operators. I guess I should look at that move. I know operators are looking to really virtualize that whole level of their operations. Are you seeing pretty good progress in terms of operators virtualizing, I guess, that policy plane in order to support these changes, these more agile offerings that they want to bring to market? Because obviously, they're competing against OTT players who have this internet mindset from the get-go, and a lot of their stuff is already virtualized. Are you finding that operators are able to comprehend the need to really virtualize these parts of their operations and are moving in that direction?
So yeah, I mean, carriers. I don't think that there are carriers out there who don't want to be more nimble and want to be able to operate in a faster way. Sure. And they fully understand it. And I think the desire is there. The need is there as well. So carriers, so there's no convincing work that has to be done.
Okay.
The question is not whether, the question is more, how do you go about it? And in a way, there are perhaps two different camps. It is the one camp says, okay, we're trying to take different vendors' components and put them together to get towards that agility. Mm-hmm. And one of these things that gives us the agility is actually virtualization. But that's only a subset because, again, all these different stacks. You have to have perhaps a more flexible way of rolling out software, but I have to have software that actually talks to each other. Because if I have something that is very flexible, but another component that is dependent thereof, which is not flexible, I still don't have agility. Then I have to have as well the ability of configuring it in an easy way and making sure that all the software components that are relevant to either an end user experience or to what I need from a business perspective are aligned. Mm-hmm. And so what we found out as we went on that journey is there are a lot of things that are absolutely critical of being very tightly integrated and really have a good understanding of each other, and others that are less relevant. And what we ended up today is that I would say all the key components that enable, let's call it a digital experience, mm-hmm. or agility are the ones that more or less we integrate into our system.
Okay.
So, so to come to these two camps, it is, do you build out that integration yourself? You select all the sort of best of breed components. Everything is real time, everything is very flexible and agile, or do you actually go with a solution which has it pre-integrated? And we sort of, it's on as a vendor in the second camp. And so it's almost a philosophical question, right?
Yeah.
But
I guess it does seem an important part of that, though, is the interoperability aspect of it. Because again, even if you bring a complete package to an operator, there has to be at some point, I'm sure the operator want to make sure that works across other vendors that they might have, other platforms they might have. And so, and I know at least in the virtualization space, it does seem like they're still in this kind of feeling out process when it comes to the standards bodies and processes and making sure everything's interoperable. Because that does, people have different views of what a standard could be. And I know Etsy's been working on things. There's always different organizations working on that. I guess is the interoperability challenge, is that being tackled, do you think, to a significant enough degree at this point, or is that still something that kind of has to be worked on as this evolution kind of continues across the networks?
Well, it is like the birth of a new operating model or operating system per se, right? And I think there's a lot of competing interests there, and I don't think that we have yet, just on the virtualization and the way it's operated and orchestrated, that we have a very common platform or a true operating system per se.
Yeah.
Though from its own perspective, where we're more in the BSS, OSS policy space, there's even less so a sort of new operating system in the way that you actually handle things in an agile way. Mm-hmm. You have individual components, you have standards which define how these components should work together, but these standards have been defined 10, 15 years ago. They've evolved a little bit, but they're not necessarily helping with the business problem that you have today, which is not necessarily voice, text, and data, but it's actually how do you engage the subscriber? How do you ensure that the subscriber is always aware of what's happening with the service? He gets full transparency, real time. It's not, is not pervasive in all the components. So it's a lot of things that have to come together to really make things truly agile and a truly great user experience. And there's no definition. So similar to how, the Googles or the Apples or the Facebooks, they go and build that vertically integrated capability to get there and to fulfill whatever business purpose they're trying to achieve. Very similar here. So all these layers need ways of talking to each other or understanding each other. And it's not there on the virtualization space. We're getting there. Mm-hmm. And it's definitely not there when it comes to sort of the carrier middleware. Mm-hmm. And everything has to play well.
Yeah, that's a big challenge because, again, operators are looking as they make this move to virtualization to simplify, I guess, at the end of the day, trying to make sure everything's simpler because that, again, leads to greater efficiencies and greater agility. And until it seems like those parts can be really simplified, that's going to perhaps hinder at the end of the day their complete end goal, at least one of the end goals of obviously making these services easier to manage and to provision and stuff too. So it seems like that's definitely still a challenge for the operators, it sounds like.
Yeah. Well, unless the software that actually sits on top of it is aware of the capabilities and is aware of the flexibility, you're not going to get quite the benefits out of it as well. Yeah. And so in our case, the software has been written right from the beginning with that flexibility in mind. And so we fine-tune the software to make sure that it works well with virtual machines, it works well in the architecture of how it all plays together. And so because the underlying, in the virtualization space, the underlying environment is still evolving, it's kind of very tough to fine-tune and write the software in a way and architect in a way that actually works well with an environment that is not very well defined.
Yeah, interesting.
And that's one of the benefits as well of being a SaaS provider, is that you have kind of control over all these different layers, and you can guarantee that things play very well together, from the way that the data is exchanged, the way that the APIs work, as well as the way that you fine-tune your storage layer and your service layer and the front end as well.
Yeah, it makes sense. And obviously, again, because we are kind of early in the process, and obviously you guys are already working with operators. So yeah, I mean, it seems like that SaaS model is a very efficient way to do this, at least, for these operators. I mean, it seems to allow them that flexibility to roll this stuff out now. And should guarantee the ability to interoperate down the line as well. So it seems like a good model, at least for now, for operators.
Yeah, and it helps. And at the end, carriers need very reliable SLAs. And how do you manage SLAs if the responsibility is with so many different players? It's something that still has to be worked out.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, again, like you said at the beginning of the conversation, I mean, obviously telco has a very different model or a view of the world as opposed to the internet world. I mean, telco has a very strict SLAs and the 5 nines models and things like that. And not that the internet world doesn't as well, but it seems like the telecom industry has a very rigid way of looking at things. And if things don't match their reliability needs, they get a little nervous, and that tends to kind of then push off their decision making. So
yeah, and rightly so. I mean, it is what makes the telco a telco. So that's not necessarily going away. Mm-hmm. Internet players handle it in a different way, but it helps a lot of internet players that not all services are necessarily paid for. So the expectation is different as well. Yeah. And so on one hand, for some services, perhaps the telco players can be less stringent. And that helps as well, the way that you architect your system, and you basically allow the software to be built to be tolerant and more flexible that way. And it makes things a little bit more cost efficient as well.
Sure. Makes sense. Well, good. Well, maybe I guess a final wrap-up question. I mean, as you look forward and look ahead to what It's On is doing, but also as you view kind of the telecom space and how they're adapting to this new virtualized world, I mean, do you see any sort of great challenges, or what do you see as kind of maybe some of the things that probably have to be worked on to really allow, I guess, the next evolution or the next step in terms of kind of this move towards this new virtualized world we're all seeing more and more of?
Right. Yeah, I think it kind of alluded to that. It's for it to be widely adopted and for the software vendors to actually adopt it fully, you need the underlying, let's call it the operating model or the operating system that is really just emerging right now to be stable. Mm-hmm. And once it is stable, it is fully understood. Once you know how to fine-tune your software for that environment, mm-hmm. things start to then evolve. It will take time. So then in the meantime, though, if you have to solve a business problem, how do you roll it out? The SaaS model seems to be very, seems to be the right model for that.
Yeah.
You get that flexibility, you get the cost efficiencies of the internet model. You get the predictability with regards from a business perspective, with the SaaS perspective. You get all the benefits of a new architecture, a new way of doing things, all the agility, and you don't have to wait for a year or 2 or 3 years for everything to be in place.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, great. Well, Robert, we definitely appreciate the great insight on this today. Obviously, you guys have been in the space here for a while now, have some great real-world experience there, obviously with Sprint and Virgin Mobile. So it's good to get some insight from you guys on what's happening out there in the world. We definitely appreciate the time and insight today. Thanks so much for that.
Great. You're welcome.
Great. Great. Well, thanks again for joining us on this week's NFV SDN Reality Check, and make sure to check us out again next week. Thanks for watching.
NFV SDN Reality Check with Dan Meyer is a production of RCR TV. To suggest show topics or to reach Dan, you can find him on email, dmeyer@rcrwireless.com, and on Twitter @Meyer_Dan. For more Dan, news on NFV SDN and everything wireless, find your way over to rcrwireless.com.